Hi, everyone. I'm Jillian. I'm a learning advisor with Academic Skills, and I'm going to take you through our workshop on publishing in journals for STEM HDR students who are interested in publishing in academic journals. So STEM stands for if you're in the sciences, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So this is geared towards you guys in those subjects. Okay, so we'll talk about targeting a journal. There's some overlap here with writing journal articles, a necessary overlap, but we'll focus a bit more on targeting journals, explaining the mystery of the peer review process, and then some ideas for how to deal with those reviews when you get them. Okay, so we want to be thinking about in the session itself, when there's students, we had breakout rooms. So you want to think for yourself, what is your aim? What are you aiming to get published? And what's your key message? And that's the most important to think about before you can really think about submitting to any journal. You've got to think about what is my aim here? What is it that I want to get published? What aspect of my research, what findings that I think meet the scope of a journal article? So with your thesis, you might have 3 or 4 journal articles. So you want to think about how to break up your results into those maybe 3 or 4 or 5 or 2 parts to really get the scope of what a journal article is and the length of results that you can fit into that more compact piece of work. And you've also got to come up with your key message. So that's something we've talked about in the writing your journal articles workshop. So honing in on what that key message is going to help direct you to target the right journal to suit what your findings are, but also to help you to think about how to address your audience as well, based on who's reading the journal. You might have several audiences that would be interested in your key message. And so once you've targeted a journal, then you'll be able to write with that particular audience in mind, with the knowledge they have and the knowledge they need to know in order to understand the significance of your key message. So it's very important to have that specific journal in mind before you start writing the actual journal. So try to keep in mind that you've got to kind of have a key message and know, this is my research, this is what I found, this is what it means, this is why it's significant. But then you would have several options probably of what a good journal might be. It might be, that you rank them in hardest to get into at the top and kind of ones that seem easier to you. You may not have an idea of what are the top journals, what are the lower sort of journals. You might think about audience. Who is it that I want to direct my key message to and target in that case? So, gather together what those specific journals might be and make your selection based on what we discuss next. So how are you going to choose and target one journal, right? You might have a couple in mind. You might be able to find a couple. And then how are you going to narrow that down even further? Well, we have some ideas for thinking about what could be the best fit. You want to think about asking your supervisors and colleagues if you haven't done that already. You want to think about who are those people, those researchers that you love, and where did they publish? You want to think about all those past papers that you love. Could you publish there? Those editorial boards of certain journals, do you recognize those names? Are they prominent scholars in your specific niche field? And do you think that would make it a good fit? And ideas to join listservs of your discipline, if you have that. A lot of disciplines do, or sub-disciplines have associations for their field that have to do with like the annual conference in your field, the international conference, and there's usually an association that goes along with that. I have that in my field in academics, skills teaching, language and writing, learning field. I also would have it in my other field for my PhD in social sciences and gender studies. So see if you've got such an association for your field, and they will often announce special issues. And if your research fits a special issue, then you have a better chance of getting in because it's a smaller pool. It's a smaller call. It's not a wide open call. So you might want to think about that. Think about the examining the aims and scopes, see what fits your key message. And are there any issues, ongoing issues or debates in the journal that you might be able to contribute to? That's also an easier way in if you can see that there is an ongoing problem that the journal is coming back to, is trying to solve, is, devoting a special issue towards. You want to be really clear in your cover letter and in your article that you are commenting and you're, contributing to this ongoing debate and, having your point of view based on your findings and where you think, this issue or this debate is headed. And that's a way to really show you're a fan of the journal, and they would take your submission much more seriously in that case than if you just kind of, sent it out to them without really doing much research about that particular journal. And then think about that likelihood of success. Try to learn about the acceptance rate and, how your supervisor and colleagues feel about this journal. If it seems like it's very difficult to get into, you're going to have to think about your strategy here. Where are you going to try first? Knowing that trying takes some time. Takes some time to get editors to look at it, to get it to peer review, to get the peer reviews back. It's going to take it's a long process. So you really want to do your best to create the strategy that works for you in terms of, what your goals are. If your goals are, I want to be published in the top journal, I think I've really got something here. I wouldn't discourage you from going for it. If you're on a bit of a time frame and you're doing your thesis by compilation and you've got to get things moving, and your main goal is to graduate and then, get a job in the field afterwards, then it might be a better strategy to go for that lower journal so you can have those publications, not wait that long, not face a rejection. If if you choose a journal that's maybe quite selective. So think about what your goals are in terms of, do you want to go ahead with research and, show off your top name journals on your CV, or, are you not sure about that? Or do you just want to go into industry? In that case, you're going to have a different strategy. So think about what's going to work for you. Okay, there's this link here that you might follow to help you find the right journal. That's another way of attacking this problem of finding the right journal for your research and its implications. So you can type in your keywords there, your abstract, your title, and it'll come up with some stuff. I've done it too, and it's come up with some pretty good ones for my work, and some ones I hadn't heard about that actually would be a good fit. So it's an interesting exercise to work through. Now, thinking about, like I said before, different audiences, I just have an example here from my partner's work on timber tracking. That's quite a specific thing. He was doing DNA analysis of timber to find out its kind of genetic map to identify illegal logging. Very specific thing, right? You're all doing very specific things. And it impinges on these different areas, broader areas of discipline, of subdisciplines, of multidisciplines. So you want to think about what are your areas that could fit your key message, or could fit, your basic sort of really focused area of research, and where do you want to go with that? Who is your audience? My partner could go into conservation science. That's a really big field. So then he'd have to really position himself and timber tracking and its importance in a different way than if he was, going for population genetics, which is more of the method that he used. And so he might not have to explain how important timber tracking is and illegal logging and the issues with illegal logging as much, because the people who read that journal will be more interested in the method that he used to come up with his genetic map of the specific tree species. Wildlife forensics, forensic science would be broader, and wildlife forensics would be a little bit more narrow, focusing on animals and plants, whereas forensic science would also include humans. So that's a bigger research field. So if he were to go for forensic science in general, he'd have to, again, carve out his space for timber tracking, as opposed to more of the probably human articles that they would get based on human subjects and results. Wildlife, again, that's a smaller pool with animals and timber. Probably it's still animal heavy with the forensic work. So again, carving out the importance of timber, but less so than if it's at that bigger field of forensic science. So thinking about those areas, those disciplines, those subdisciplines, and where can you go? And you have to then adjust your key message, adjust your writing, a bit of your intro in order to really sell your research to that particular area. The wider the area, probably the harder it is to get in. If it was a forensic science journal, that would probably be harder than a wildlife forensics journal because it would be more specific and less people would then submit to that. Conservation science is really big, right? So that will be harder to get into. So, those are the choices that he would have to make, that he did make to, complete his thesis on publication and submit to these various journals. So think about what fits with your niche area and who do you want to target. It could be as you work down the line here and you publish more and more. I've published a lot in population genetics. I want to try a new audience. I want to reach a new group of people. So you don't have to worry about, this all feeling very stale and coming up with new arguments and new research to write for the population genetics crowd. You can kind of repurpose your research and think about how you might address conservation scientists with your work, right? So thinking about those different audiences you can address and let know about your work is, should be an exciting prospect and also part of your strategy when thinking about the journals that you want to target. Okay, so again, I talked about time to publication. You want to think about how well your scope and aims fit. This might be a bit of trial and error. You might want to, consult various people about this, your supervisors and all of that, but, trying to understand what that scope and aim is and how your key message may or may not fit into it. Thinking about you're going to need to really study the style, length, and format so you can meet that for your target journal. Impact factor might be a thing for you guys, more so in STEM. Thinking about that again with the selectivity of the journal and your strategy there, it might cost money to submit, and then that means finding out from your supervisor what your type of funding is for that, if that's what's happening in your field. So narrowing it down, obtain the journal's guidelines, whether it's the one you're going to target or, you're still looking at several. The guidelines might help you make that decision because you've got to then pick one and write with that specific journal in mind, thinking about that audience, what they know, what they need to know to care, and then understand your research findings. You need to know how much background context to provide, what you want to focus on in terms of often in your, even the framing of your abstract, the framing of the problem, and how you then further frame it in the introduction and what you explain as part of a little mini lit review in the intro will be very dependent on the audience. So you've got to get to know them and what they may or may not know and need to know. And the formatting, the referencing, all that needs to be quite tailored. Okay, so then take this time now to research those few journals using the slides we've mentioned. All of these slides are on our HDR Waddle site, so you can just enroll in that, Academic Skills HDR workshops, and these slides are there for you. Okay, so thinking about that, discuss with your colleagues, what are the journals you're thinking about targeting? Why is that? Why is that your top choice? What do you think about that one? Why is that a good aspiration for you? And why is it also a good match? Okay, so then what are they looking for? That's, turning the tables now. What do these people want from you in your article submission? So they really want it to fit their journal. They want to see you've done that work and that you have looked at their aims and scopes and their audience and their past issues and understand why and how your work fits their journal well, fits their audience, fits their expectations, fits their, level that they're expecting out of, findings. Want it to be novel, you've got to show that it's genuine. A lot of times things get rejected because it's not clear to the editor or reviewers that this is actually new work. I'm sure you are doing new work, but you've got to frame it as new and you've got to really sell the contribution. So right now, you're doing a lot of work, you're doing a lot of important work. Everyone around you knows that the work you're doing is important, but then the people that you're writing to don't know that, and they need to be sold that it's important. So you've really got to show us that this does make a unique, original contribution to the field. And you've got to show us how it does that and convince us that it does. We won't just, if you just say the results are this, we're not going to understand why that's significant or what your contribution is and how that's unique. So you've got to frame it to sell it to us. I know that's not a comfortable thing to do for us academics, but we've got to get comfortable with doing that because that's part of it, part of this work of submitting to journals. Okay, so these journals tell you what they want. Some are really specific and it takes quite a while to go through, especially for you guys, like the formatting of the graphs and charts and statistics and all of that might take a while to read through and understand their particular formatting specifications. Some might be less so. So, just take this time to read it through. That's the only thing you can do, because if you don't meet their guidelines, then they're not even going to send it probably to the peer reviewers. So at least to get past the editor and to make it to the peer reviewers, you've got to make sure you've met all these guidelines. So this isn't for the faint of heart. This is hard work that involves, much work beyond working in the lab and finding out your results and understanding what they mean and writing the journal. It also involves this whole next step around the work you have to do to be able to publish, or before you can even submit. So then an editor receives it and they're going to skim through the cover letter. And there's a link later to show you just how to write that brief cover letter. They're going to read the abstract, conclusions, and references, and they're going to make a decision, a kind of quick decision, to see if the submission does meet the scope and does have a sufficient impact, weigh up that novelty of it. See if it is significant enough for the expectations and the readers and the impact of the journal. And so at this point, it could get rejected. That does happen to some papers that aren't targeted appropriately. So that means it doesn't meet the guidelines. It's outside the aims and scope. Actually, the significance is not clear, or it's just not there. And the standard of writing is not there either. They can't really make out what is being expressed. So that would just get sent back to you quite quickly to say this is not going further in the peer review process. But if it does get further, the editor will write to you then and say this has gone on to the peer reviewers. And then what are the peer reviewers looking for? They're all, again, they're checking from their more specific, knowledgeable point of view than maybe the editor has, that your work is indeed original and new. They're looking closely at the study design and method to see that it's detailed, and if they have any issues with how it was carried out, and if it really matches clearly with the research aims, and if the data is then extrapolated appropriately to, if they feel that, your interpretations of the data that you've described, are convincing to them. They want to check you've engaged with all the relevant current scholarship, your citations are there of what, they're expecting are the key names in the field that you would be citing. That those results are clear, that they meet the reviewer's expectations from what they read in the methods, that the conclusions are justified, and it does fit the scope of the journal. The writing is at a high standard as well. So that's all that they're looking for and will be commenting on in an overview sort of way, as well as in a line by line, could be quite specific way, like you need to cite this person here. So thinking about what you want to do, you've got to take that time. The only way, if you want to do it, the only way to do it is to take this time to read these full articles from your target journal. So take 2 or 3 and really think about how they position themselves to align with the aims and scope of the journal, how they address the audience. Think about yourself, how you're being positioned as a reader, how well certain things are explained to you, how they present their evidence, looking at their language, how they move through the moves of the intro, of the discussion, try to really break it down and figure out how you can do something similar in your writing. If this is your target journal, this is your goal to get published there. You've got to learn the ways in which previous people have been published in this journal and learn from them. and what they've done in order to meet this success that you want to soon meet. Okay, so you've got to make sure your message is clear in the abstract, in the intro before you submit. Certainly, you've got to make sure you've argued for the original contribution your work is making, that the writing is of this scholarly quality in terms of, the writing itself, as well as the way you, cite other sources, show that your work builds on the work of others, show that your work is within the, putting your work in the wider context of other works in your discussion mainly. You're going to need lots of feedback. You can come see us at Academic Skills for academic writing feedback, your colleagues and mentors for more of the content feedback. And how do you feel about it being read by experts? That's a good test, I think. If you're all of a sudden like embarrassed by the idea of your idol, research idol reading it, who might, you never know, read it if they're a peer reviewer on that journal. And, how would you feel about being rejected? Can you face that? Are good tests before you send it out. And before you send it out, you're going to be writing a cover letter. I suggest following this link in order to learn more about how to write that cover letter. They have a bad example and then a better example. And that's still your place to sell your article to the journal editor to show that it does align with the aims and scope and that you are making an original contribution. Okay, if you have a chapter, if you are doing more of a traditional thesis and then you want to also publish articles based on those longer chapters you've written, it's not a matter of just, cutting a few thousand words from your chapter, but keeping the structure of the chapter basically the same. You've got to probably shift it a bit to meet the audience needs of that particular journal you've targeted. You've got to think about, really honing in on that key message kernel and, then going through perhaps the IMRAD stages of intro, methods, results, discussion. But it's probably going to take a rewrite in order to do it rather than, I've already written this. I've just got to cut some paragraphs and I can just send it out to whoever. It's going to take a bit more work than that. Okay, the peer review process. I want to tell you about this peer review process and what exactly happens within it and why we do it. So as you guys know, it's important to ensure this scholarly rigor and quality. That's how we are upkeeping our academic standards and showing this academic conversation over time. It certainly improves articles. It's so very detailed, can be very detailed and intricate and tedious process, but ultimately it does improve the work. It shows that the reputation of the journal, it improves the reputation, it protects the reputation, and it's central to all our work. So we've got to accept it and move on, even though it can be a tough process to get rejected, to be told you have to make all these changes, to hear that the reviewers didn't seem to understand what you wrote. It can be very frustrating, but we have to accept that this is central to our work if this is what we want to do, if we want to publish in journals and be academics. So there's different review types. I would believe the most common is the double blind. So that's when you don't know who your reviewers are and they don't know who you are. Single blind would mean they know who you are and you don't know who they are. And open would mean everybody knows each other. So it's often double blind. I think it might be open when it's a really small field and there aren't very many reviewers anyway. So everyone already knows each other. So the editor will let you know what's going on, if it's been rejected or if it's being sent off to reviewers. And here's the process. So you submit your article, assessed by the editor, might get rejected, hopefully not. Hopefully you've targeted appropriately, and then it will be sent to reviewers and they will review it and make their decision. They will decide if you need further revisions, if it's accepted at that point, if it needs further revisions that might be minor, if it needs substantial revisions. The most common response is that it needs substantial revisions. So don't be alarmed by that. That's probably the most typical response that anyone gets. Then you have the chance to revise it based on what the reviewers have said. And then you send it back to the editor and they make the decision as to whether it needs further outside review, or whether the editor themselves feel you've addressed all the comments appropriately, and then they will accept it. At that point, it still could actually be rejected. It could go through this whole process of, maybe months or a year, and then still be rejected. It could go out to, you could revise it, send it to the editor. The editor sends it back to the reviewers, and the reviewers say, come back with inconclusive comments. And the editor says, no, we're not going to go through with this anymore. There's too many issues that haven't been resolved, and, try again next time. So be prepared for some heartache. Hopefully that won't happen to you. Hopefully you go through the process quite smoothly. So just something from what Nature has said about why they often will reject papers, and that's because the work does not seem novel and does not seem far-reaching enough, and that it's not readable. So, we're not all going for Nature, but if you're thinking about your own work and your own reputation and your own standards, then this is something you're going for, to have that excellent readability, to have that clarity around the far-reaching implications of your work. So something to think about as you are submitting, and how you deal with certain elements of the process in terms of rejection or revision. So who are these people who are reviewing your work? They could be academics, postdocs, even PhDs. They may not be the exact experts on your topic, depending on your field and how broad or narrow it is. They are often time poor, like you are, like we all are, and they're doing it for free. And they've been there. They've had their own papers rejected. Sometimes it may not seem that way based on how they write and if their feedback is constructive or not. But they've been there too. So we've got to keep that in mind. Ultimately, they're doing something really nice for you and for their academic community by reviewing this work. And they often do it in a very detailed way that takes a lot of time. So we do want to have our mindset with that positive idea that they're actually doing something nice for you and their academic community, rather than the negative thoughts we might have about the feedback they gave and how they don't understand our work and how could they think this. Sometimes the comments can be surprising and frustrating for you. So again, as we said, you could be accepted. You could be accepted with minor revisions. Most commonly, it will be revise and resubmit. So that means substantial revisions, and you can resubmit it to the editor, and they'll be happy to see it again. But it's not a guarantee of acceptance later on. Or the peer reviewers can just reject it. So you could get rejected by the editor, or the reviewers themselves do look at it, but they say it should be rejected, or the editor, after reading through 3 reviews and 2 of them say it should be rejected, the editor makes the final call to say, yeah, this is just going to be rejected. Or, one of the reviewers says this isn't worth revising, but 2 of them say it is. So I'm going to give you the comments and say, yes, you can revise and resubmit. So it is up to the editor to make that final judgment based on the reviewer's comments. It could be 2 or 3 reviewers typically. Okay, so I went through all of that. Okay, so here's just a little message from an editor that, in light of the reviews, unfortunately feel is unsuitable for publication. The information, I attached the reviewer comments at the bottom of this email. So this person has been, gone to peer review, has been rejected. The editor has decided from the reviewer's comment, this is not going any further. But they will let this author see what the reviewer said for their own learning and improvement in the future. So common reasons manuscripts are rejected: doesn't fit the aim and scope. It's actually like a reporting thing and isn't really, or clearly a thesis chapter. It's not written for the journal. So we've got a target. It's going to be rejected if it's not targeted appropriately, if you're not really drawing upon the examples of the articles already published in the journal and trying to, meet those standards. Okay, so all of that has to do with just meeting the standards of the journal and those expectations. New contribution. Research needs to be contextualized. If it's not, and if you're not, talking about other research and what others have found, it will also likely to be rejected. If they don't like your theoretical framework, they don't think it makes sense or matches the problem statement, that's an issue. Okay, all those reasons. So what do you do about it, this rejection, if your article gets rejected? You want to understand why. You've got to think about, if I've got the wrong scope, I can go to a different journal. I have to do a bit of a revision to meet the new audience needs and guidelines and formatting of that journal, but I can do that. If it's the wrong length, I can revise that. If it's the wrong framework, that means rethinking what you did at the experiment phase or how you framed the framework. Maybe they didn't, really understand, you didn't write clearly enough about the framework and why that was the best framework. So that involves some rethinking. Poor style, you've got to develop skills. You've got to, work with academic skills. You've got to really work hard on your own to think about developing those communication skills. And if it's about the contribution, you may want to think about, how can I really frame this contribution? What is my contribution? Rethink that again, so you can really sell that this is making a contribution. This is important. So some journals will often feel like, well, this work isn't important enough. And so how can you really show that it actually is? This is your thesis. It is important work, but we've got to not just forget that it's important, or just kind of know that in the background as a default. We've got to really be able to communicate that very clearly and persuasively. Okay, more reasons that manuscripts are rejected. These have to do a little bit more with you guys in STEM, that the journal didn't think the issue was important. So you've got to frame it as important or go to another journal who would think the issue was important. Again, not original, didn't make that case for originality. They didn't feel that you actually tested your hypothesis, like that wasn't lined up. Hypothesis, methods, results, they didn't get that line up and thought there was a mismatch there. They think you should have conducted your study in a different way. So again, that's about the alignment. You've got to show problem, methods, that it all makes sense and matches up. Otherwise, they'll say, well, why didn't you do it in this way? This way makes more sense. Whereas you know which way makes sense, but you've not articulated it clearly why you've chosen the way you've done it. Maybe they think you've compromised on your research design. Maybe you want to talk about what your limitations were, but why we can still take these findings as important and saying something. Again, making those arguments for your work. And I've seen this in some examples that the reviewers have said these conclusions were not justified. This doesn't really make sense. You've got this data and then you're saying it means this, and I don't see that connection. So you've got to be quite truthful and clear about the conclusions that you draw from your findings. Okay, revise and resubmit, most common. Still really positive, but it takes some work to go through all those comments and systematically work through them and respond to them. Okay, so dealing with these reviews, stay calm, maybe put it away for a little while if you're feeling upset by them and frustrated, but ultimately it's a learning experience and we've got to get that mindset going so that we can do what we need to do, which is publish in this journal. So comment types can be helpful and constructive. Most hopefully, everybody's going to say you're missing literature. That's pretty much a given. So that's okay. They could point out like line by line changes they feel that you should make, and that those are easy ones usually. They might have misunderstood or misread your work, and that could be to do with the way you posed it. So you've got to then be more clear around what it is you actually meant. And maybe they're saying, oh, change it to be like this, but you're saying, no, it's fine the way it is. I just didn't totally explain it that clearly. So let me re-explain in a clearer, more direct way why I chose this method. And then that's addressing the comment too. You don't have to agree with every comment. You should probably agree with most of it and not fight every point. But there are certainly times when you can say, respectfully disagree, but I have made this change to make what I did more clear. But I'm not making this other change that you've suggested because of this misunderstanding. Some of the comments could be contradictory or confusing. One reviewer could say one thing, another reviewer could say the exact opposite. So you have to then decide, what is going to make this happen for me? What do I need to do to get into this journal? What are the appropriate changes? But it's not about holding on to your original and being defensive. That's the kind of worst thing you can do. The thing you want to do with addressing these comments is thinking about, how do I best align with my key message, show the importance and contribution of my work, fulfill the kind of heart of what the reviewers have said, if not every single particularly contradictory comment that they've made. But how can I, diffuse this situation, diffuse this disagreement, and come to this point where I think I can say, I have addressed both by being more clear about this point, and, thinking that the editor will appreciate what you've done and go for that acceptance. Okay, so in the workshop version, we have some reviewer comments to look at. Please book in with a learning advisor. We can show those to you. I can't just hand those out freely and show them in a video like this one, but they do go through the way the comments look and how detailed they are, how they can be quite harsh sometimes with saying, that this framework doesn't fit, and the kind of response that the student author provides and the revisions they provide and how they set out their, how they address the comments. And that's good to have a look at. So please book in with us in an appointment and we can show you those, but unfortunately they're not freely available. We don't have permission to show them widely. But there is a way in which you want to think about how to set out your comments. So often in those examples, it is, the reviewer, when you read the comments and then you set out, you make your revisions to your document, to your article itself, and then you set out each of the comments and you write under it maybe in a different color, or others have done it where the comment they've put in italics and then their response they've put in regular font, and you address and say, this is what I did. Thank you for this comment. This is what I did to address it. Some are small. If it's just an inline comment where you had a typo and you've changed it in the document, then you say done under it. And but you address every single comment in a formatting that's hopefully easy to read and set out and differentiate between what the reviewer has said and what you have said to address that comment. Okay, so you want to think about being really courteous and polite in addressing the comments. You don't want to be defensive and angry. That's not going to come across well. That's not going to be good for your reputation. And so again, saying that right response letter, that's what I'm talking about with thank you for these comments. I have addressed them. Here are each of the comments, and here's how I've addressed each one, comment by comment, for 2 or 3 reviewers. So it takes some time to do this revising and resubmitting. Okay, so then you will write a separate letter to the editor saying, I've done my revisions. Thank you very much. This is overall what I've done. I've taken on these comments. I've, reworked, restated how I've discussed the framework, and I've done these various things. And when you again address the particular comments, you want to agree courteously and disagree respectfully and explain those reasons, but not say, you misread this. This is what I meant, but I can see how you would have read it this way. However, this is what I meant, so I've revised it in order to be more clear. Thank you for that comment. I didn't realize, that it wasn't clear and it could be misread in this way. Here's a way you might set it out. I've not seen others do it like this in the examples, but if you have fewer comments and they're more concise, this might be a way to set it out, or just setting it out in the Word doc with comment, your response, comment, your response, setting out a different style of font or different color to differentiate. Okay, so that's what we're talking about there, creating a list of your responses and, deciding if you're going to agree And if you're going to disagree, how you're going to phrase those sentences, that paragraph around your decision and justifying your decision in that courteous way. So you want to think about those major comments first when you do your revisions. That's going to take the most time. Maybe that will change some of the smaller comments anyway that the reviewer might make. But you will respond point by point in your response letter. You've got to think about really explaining this very clearly, how you've addressed the reviewer comment. That's also got to be convincing and persuasive. You might want to, show these drafts to your supervisor. You can show them to us. It's a little bit harder at that stage for us to get on track with the whole story involved, but you can show us pieces of it. And just, that emotion should just be courtesy and gratefulness, and that will get you everywhere rather than defensiveness and frustration. Okay, so then it might get accepted once it goes through that process. It still might be rejected. And, we've got to pick ourselves up and keep going. It all depends on what your goal is. And, thinking about that bigger goal to be an academic, to get this work out there, keep going, rework the manuscript and submit it elsewhere. And maybe be more strategic. You've made the wrong strategy about which journal to send it to. We all will do that because it's new for us. So that's okay. You've learned something and now you can revise your strategy. Okay, so, a lot of leading journals, the acceptance rate is well below 10%. And again, it's all about the contribution, right? 92% have been rejected because it failed to make a contribution. So you really want to be able to signal that. Okay. It takes a lot of work to publish in journals, so you've got to keep going, keep working, don't stop, because that's what it takes to be successful in publishing in journals. So best of luck to you. And there's more resources here. You can follow these links around disseminating your work. Once it's published in a journal, you still want to maybe do some work to get that article more well-known, more well-cited than it might be if you didn't kind of let other groups know that this work has been published. So there's resources at ANU and some ideas there about disseminating your work from that I've looked up that might be helpful in terms of specific blogging, posting on scholarly collaboration networks, mention yourself in a Wikipedia article, starting a blog of your own, mentioning it on scholarly listservs like I talked about before, where the associations having to do with your discipline. You could create a video about your research. Someone became well known from doing that. I have the link there that you might want to have a look at. Okay, some additional resources here for you guys. I definitely recommend the second one, Cargill, writing scientific research articles. That's really good. And come see us, Learning Advisors. We'd love to see you and learn more about your work and help you through this process as best we can. Hope you found this video helpful, and we'll see you soon.